The reading I chose this morning is actually a story that I wrote 41 years ago on Easter Sunday in 1980. I was living in a village called Kituro in Kenya, and I called it Falling in Love, Rising in Love. And still after all this time, it's very emotional for me, to read it. She emptied the big earthenware pitcher into a wooden basin and splashed the cool water on her face. Her deep brown eyes were swollen and bloodshot. She tied back her long, shiny black tresses with a piece of cloth and bundled them into a veil. Her face was pale and gaunt after her 50-hour fast. Hastily, she threw a cloak about her shoulders, carefully picked up the alabaster jar, took the wooden bar from the inside of the door, and stepped into the half-night. The chill of the fetal day stung her throat as she turned swiftly and sped along the silent streets. Yellow-white ribbons of undarkness infiltrated feebly from the east, erasing the fainter stars. She hadn't expected it would end like this. She didn't know what she had expected, except that this had never occurred to her. It was still difficult to believe that it really had happened. But like everything else about him, she accepted it completely, with the total love only a woman is capable of offering a man. Life had never been the same since she met him. The searching gentleness of his eyes and the soothing, healing touch of his hands had melted the bitterness within her, had banished the despair and depression that, until then, had frequently enveloped her like a thick, choking, claustrophobic fog. It had given way to a deep, tranquil peace. In the darkness of a doorway, a mongrel dog stood up, arched his back, yawned, and then stealthily watched her. My God, she thought, is all the blackness and nauseating despondency to return now that he is gone? Gone? Gone, he is gone. Is there nothing for me now except to remain faithful to a memory? She skirted the hill and her sandals kicked up fluffy cloudlets of red dust. As she opened the gate of the garden, she suddenly remembered that there would be a very large stone at the mouth of the burial chamber. Frustrated, she ran the last few yards and stopped abruptly, looking at the gaping mouth of the tomb. Terror wrapped itself about her heart. Even in death, is he to find no peace from the relentless pursuit of his enemies? She thought. Hysterically, she ran back to the city and told Peter and John what had happened. In utter bewilderment, they ran to the graveyard to see for themselves, while she followed breathlessly far behind. Peter and John saw and began to dare to believe. They headed back for the still slumbering city, rushing past her without a word. Again, she was left alone with an empty grave. Her pent-up grief exploded, and she fell to her knees, body shaking convulsively, disheveled hair spilling about her face, and tears tickling through her fingers. My God, let all this just be a bad dream. Let me wake and find it is only a phantom of the night. She raised her head and looked into the tomb again. 2 young men were seated there. They asked her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" "They have taken my Lord away," she sobbingly replied, "and I don't know where they've put him." As she said this, she was conscious of a movement behind her, and looking around, she saw another man standing there. He asked her the same question. Tears shimmeringly reflected her vision. Stray locks of hair stuck to her wet face, and the newborn sun was silhouetting his form, so she did not recognize him. Thinking him to be the keeper of the graveyard, she bowed and clasped his feet and pleaded, "Sir, if you have taken him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will go and remove him." Jesus smiled and called, "Mary." It was enough. The intonation, accent, sensitivity, and love all intertwined in that one word could only be his. She struggled to her feet and fired herself at him, smothering him in an embrace. He stroked her hair and gently brushed the tears from her face with his fingertips, smiling all the while. Then he said, "Mary, do not cling to me. Go and tell my brothers and sisters that I am alive." "No, Jesus, let me stay with you. I don't ever want you to go away again," she protested. He smiled again and said, "I also want to remain with you, always, and I will. But how? You do not yet understand. Do you believe me?" "Yes. Oh, yes, I believe and I love. And my love gives me understanding. I know that you will keep this promise too." He kissed her gently on the forehead and said, "Go then and tell them what you have seen." She pressed his fingers to her lips and then left him, lightly dancing her way back to the city. Early groups of workers were beginning the week sluggishly. A wizened old man in a white flowing beard stumbled out of a doorway as she was about to pass. "Shalom," she smiled at him. "Shalom. Shalom, daughter of Zion," he replied, wondering how swollen, bloodshot eyes could laugh at hers as hers did. "Did you have a pleasant Sabbath yesterday?" he asked. Her bottom lip quivered involuntarily. "No, ancient one, not yesterday. Today is my Sabbath." He looked quizzically after her departing figure. Strange, he thought. Strange. Strange eyes. Strange face. Strange words. Very strange words. These are words inspired by God. We Irish love the taste of words. It's interesting that in Irish, the same word "bloss" can mean the taste, like of food, and also the accent you have, kind of regional accent. So we love to talk. And so in my time in Kenya, I was often asked to give retreats, parish retreats, sometimes retreats to bunches of priests, sometimes to nuns. And I remember on one occasion, around the same time that I wrote this piece that I've just read for you, I had been invited to give a retreat to a bunch of African nuns called the Asumbi Sisters, who lived in Western Kenya. So it was a 6-day retreat. And at the end of the retreat, just the day I was about to leave, we had a kind of a Q&A asking about the theme of the retreat. And I remember one sister asking me, I was talking in Swahili, she said to me, "Padre, mbona wafuasi wake Yesu hawakumtambua baada ya kufufuka kwake?" Why is it, Father, that the disciples of Jesus didn't recognize him after his resurrection? And being the smart ass that I am, I said, "Sababu wakati alikuwa kaburini aling'oa ndevu yake." Because while he was in the tomb, he shaved off his beard. And I'm expecting her to give a big guffaw. And she had this look on her face. She said, "Kumbe, Padre. Wow, Father." So I want to start this lecture today, this sermon today, this homily today. It's the second part of a 2-part homily on resurrection. And next week, God willing, I'll do a recap of the 2 homilies and then open it up to Q&A. And so I want to start in a strange place this morning. I want to start with looking at the humor of resurrection. I'm going to make 5 main points. So the first one called "Let Us Play." Secondly, fractals of resurrection. Thirdly, the 2 crosses. Fourthly, the encounter at the lake. And then fifthly, the deeper mystical meaning of resurrection. So I want to start a little bit humorously this morning. And I'm not doing this out of any disrespect for the topic. I'm doing it because I'm hoping that by infusing humor into the situation, I can shake up what we normally think about as resurrection, because we're locked into this kind of physical body modality. I want to shake that up a little bit. So I'm going to start with humor and then develop the homily with intelligence and then finally end the homily with love. That's where I want to go. So I want to start playfully by asking, why was it that people didn't recognize him? Mary didn't recognize him. The disciples on the road to Emmaus didn't recognize him. Why was that? And being facetiously, I want to look at How many other people do you think were walking around Jerusalem that day with holes in their hands and their feet? How in God's name could it not recognize him? If they looked at his feet or they looked at his hands, they should have seen holes and blood coming out. So what do you think he did with his physical body during the 40 days between resurrection and ascension, according to the scriptures? In that time, when you look at all the biblical accounts, he made 14 different appearances, but some of them lasted only a few minutes and a few of them just a few hours. So maybe a total of 24 hours out of 40 days. So where was his body, his physical body, for the rest of the time? Did he kind of sneak back into the tomb? Did he go off into the desert to pray some more? Did he go back into his mother's house and say, Mum's the word, and kind of lay low for 40 days? And at the end of the 40 days, what did he do with his physical body? At ascension, did he carry this physical body up into the heavens? After 5 miles, his physical body would have run out of oxygen. It couldn't breathe, above about 25,000 feet. And so did God send a UFO to take him out? Or did he kind of volunteer for another mission on another Earth-like planet where his physical body would do him just fine? So what did he do with his physical body during that time? And what about his voice and his accent? Surely fellow Galileans, when he was speaking to them, like the 2 guys on the road to Emmaus, they must have recognized that this was a Galilean accent. And why didn't they recognize his peculiar intonation, and use of words and his teaching style? And what about clothes? Where did he get the clothes he walked around in? So we know, for instance, that when he was stripped naked at the cross and nailed to the cross, the soldiers took his garments, they threw dice for his garments. And we know that when he was put in the tomb, he was wrapped in a shroud. But when they found the empty tomb, the shroud was in the tomb. So was he schlepping around Jerusalem naked? Or did the angels kind of do a quick visit to Nordstrom's on the way and pick him up a kind of a suit? Or did he go into somebody's backyard and steal clothes off the laundry line? So how come he was vested, during these appearances? Now, I'm doing this not just to be disrespectful. I'm doing it just to shake up this notion of, resurrection and physicality, because resurrection is much, much deeper than, although it may include physicality. So that's the first point. I just want to shake up that container to begin thinking a little more deeply about resurrection. That's my first point. Second point, then, I'll call it fractals of resurrection. You know that a fractal is a pattern that repeats at an infinite number of scales. So it's the same basic pattern, but it repeats at larger and larger or smaller and smaller scales. And you can actually generate some beautiful visual fractals from just simple mathematical formulas. So I want to look at some of the fractals then that maybe helped us explain resurrection in more detail. So when you look at your own body as a fractal, and you realize that every 7 years, every single cell in your body changes, dies, and is replaced. Every single cell. After 7 years, there's not a single cell in your body that was there 7 years ago. They've all been replaced. So you're a fractal that's repeated on a 7-year cycle. But in fact, if you look at your skeletal system, just the interiority of you, that's replaced on a 6-month cycle. Within 6 months, every single cell in your skeletal system is replaced with a brand new cell. If you look, for instance, at the lining of your stomach, every cell in the lining of your stomach is replaced on a 6-week cycle. And if you look at the skin in your hand, or your entire body, your entire skin is replaced every 4 weeks. There's not a single cell in your body, on the skin of your body that was there 4 weeks ago. It's replaced by a lookalike according to a pre-existing pattern. So it's going to look the same, but it's actually going to be new. When you look, for instance, at your breathing, typically you breathe about 18 times every minute. Or you look at your heartbeat, typically your heart is beating about 70 times a minute. So on a scale of 70 times a minute to once every 7 years, you are constantly resurrecting yourself. Even your physical body is constantly being resurrected. So what about your entire lifespan itself? I really believe that we are characters in God's dream. I've said this many, many times, that I believe that earth life is simply a dream that the ego is having. And the ego is a dream that the soul is having. And the soul is a dream that spirit is having. And spirit is a dream that God is having. So we are elements in God's dream. We are literally God in drag. And so we are fractals within fractals within fractals of the one life, which is God. Now, time as we experience it is also an extraordinary fractal. So every single day is a solo dance where Earth pirouettes on its own axis. It's a dancer, just like Vicky did for us last week, pirouetting on its own axis once every 24 hours. And so in some senses, a single day is a fractal. It's a pirouette, it's a dance of the fractal. You look at 1 month, and a month is a dance involving two partners, the moon and the earth. And in 29 and a half days, it does a complete circuit of the earth. So the earth's in the middle whirling, and the moon is going around it as a dance partner. Every single year is a dance between the earth and the sun. 365.23 days in earth time is a single dance, a single circuit of the sun, where now the sun is in the center and the earth is dancing about it. And in fact, I believe that every single incarnation is a single dance between an ego and a soul. And you repeat that, the soul repeats that dance with different egos and different physical bodies in different incarnations. So what about the soul itself then as a fractal? I believe actually that there is only one life, but this life has many different phases. There's a pre-incarnational phase to life before you took on this spacesuit of yours. There's an incarnational phase of your life, when you have, a spacesuit. There's a post-incarnational phase when you, quote unquote, die. And then there's a reincarnational phase where your soul takes on a very different spacesuit. So I don't believe actually that there's any such thing as an afterlife. I do not believe in an afterlife. I believe there's only an also life. It's the same single life flowing through all different forms in all different phases, pre, during, post, and reincarnational phases. It's about reaching Christ consciousness, or coming upon the recognition of our Buddha nature, in which incarnation has kind of temporarily occluded. So the problem is that if we identify with this physical body, then resurrection begins to look like a miracle. And we find it difficult. How could the physical body of Jesus resurrect? If we're identified the self with the physical body, then resurrection looks like a miracle that people find difficult to believe or understand. But if the body constantly resurrects itself, as I just suggested, then there's constant resurrection happening here. And it's resurrection within a particular incarnational cycle. But then when we begin to identify with the soul, resurrection is among lifetimes, not just within a particular incarnation, but among lifetimes. So let me break into a kind of a scientific piece for a few moments here. There's a beautiful notion in quantum mechanics called the quantum leap. And it's the realization that subatomic particles, electron appears in location A, and then it appears in location B. But according to quantum mechanics, it does not move from A to B. There are no positions in between that, the electron occupies in its journey from appearing in A to appearing in B. And I've illustrated this a few times by a simple, kind of analogy. Imagine you put Christmas lights along the ridge of your roof in your house. And it's set up in such a way that, it appears that the light is traveling on the rooftop. From a distance, it looks like there's a single light that's moving right across the rooftop, but it's not moving at all. What's happening is that the first bulb is lighting up and then going off. And immediately afterwards, the second bulb lights up and goes off. Then the third one lights up, then the fourth one. So for an instant, each bulb is lit up. But to your eye, it looks like it's a single light traveling the entire distance. That's what electrons do in the quantum field. And so the quantum leap is the realization that in order to appear in B, having previously appeared in A, you do not have to occupy any space in between A and B. You can be in A, disappear, and then be in B and disappear. And this is precisely what the quantum body of Jesus Christ was doing in resurrection. The ability to appear and disappear, to manifest and demanifest. There's also in quantum mechanics what's called quantum tunneling. And quantum tunneling is the apparent ability of subatomic particles to pass through barriers. Barriers do not represent any kind of a limit to which they cannot move. And you get Jesus doing this all the time, going through closed doors, closed rooms, that somehow he was quantum leaping and quantum tunneling. So there's actually physical, scientific evidence for the phenomenon that we're talking about now. So I want to look at all of these as facets of understanding a resurrection. The third thing I want to look is I'm going to call it the two crosses, the cross of resurrection and the cross of crucifixion. So let's begin with the cross of crucifixion. I do not believe that the cross on which Jesus died was merely an instrument of torture. I believe that it was a deeply mystical symbol. And for me, it represents this, that the vertical arm of the cross represents the connection between the transcendence of God and the immanence of God, between heaven and earth, if you want to call it that. Whereas the horizontal arm of the cross represents the connection between all living things. All our brothers and sisters are as the Native American peoples will call it. That's the horizontal element. And the intersection point between the vertical and the horizontal is yourself, your mission self. And as you hold your space right there, right where your heart is right at the intersection point between the vertical and the horizontal. It's your understanding of who you really are and what your mission is. So for me, the cross represents not just an instrument of torture, but the realization of the meeting point of transcendence and immanence and the brotherhood, sisterhood of all living things, represented by your saying, yes, send me, I will hold your people in my heart. And your heart is exactly at the intersection point of these two elements. The cross of resurrection then for me represents, I spoke about this last Sunday, about what I call the before-after images and the below-above images. So the below-above images represent the fact that there was something radically different about Jesus after the resurrection, that he could pass through doorways, that he could disguise his appearance, he could manifest and demanifest. So there's something radically different. So the below-above represents the vertical, that Jesus is oscillating between his own immanence and his own transcendence. Whereas the before-after images are showing that it really was the same Jesus that they encountered after resurrection as before. So he ate fish. He told, put your hand into the marks of the nails here. And so that would be kind of the horizontal arm, the before-after arm of crucifixion. So both in crucifixion and resurrection, you have the extraordinary symbol of the cross, representing the fact that you stand at the intersection point between the transcendent and the immanent, between the divine, and the secular, between all life forms on planet Earth. Your heart is the intersection point of all those realities. So that's what I mean by the two crosses. It's my third point. The fourth point, I want to look at this beautiful account that you find in John's Gospel. It's in chapter 21 of John's Gospel, and it's the last appearance of Jesus. And at this stage, he's been missing in action for several days, maybe even a few weeks. So at this stage, the apostles give up and say, well, looks like, that's it. We had a few encounters with him. Now he's gone. We're not going to see him anymore. So what are we going to do? They had zero intention of starting a church. Zero intention of starting a church. As did Jesus. He had no intention whatsoever of starting a church. His idea was to resurrect the mystical core of Judaism. And so the apostles said, well, what are we going to do? We'll do what we know how to do. We'll go back and we'll fish. And so in this last story, 7 of them get into a boat and they're fishing at night. And they catch nothing. And they're really frustrated and in bad humor. And day is just breaking and they see somebody on the shore. And this guy says to him, did you catch anything? And of course, they're in really bad humor and they say, no. And he says to them, cast your nets onto the right side of the boat and you'll catch something. Now, here's a landlubber telling the guys on the boat how to fish. So you imagine the first reaction is, what the hell do you know about fishing? But they do it anyway. And all of a sudden, there are so many fish they can't even drag him into the boat. And Peter, the brightest of the bunch, who's going to be the first pope, he's naked, he's been stripped naked. So what does he do? He recognizes, it's the Lord. So he puts his clothes on and then he dives into the water and swims to shore. The other guys are wise enough just to row the boat to shore. But Peter, because he's really, really bright and he's going to be an infallible pope shortly, he puts his clothes back on, jumps into the water and then swims ashore. And they come to the shore and they see that Jesus is about to eat a meal. He's got some fish there and some bread and he's cooking the fish over a fire. And he says, come and eat. And he says, but I don't have enough for all of us. Go to the boat and bring some of the stuff that you've just caught. And Peter goes into the boat and what does he do? He starts counting the fish. Now, how likely is this? Have you ever tried a boat full of slippery fish, 153 of them on top of each other? Try counting them. Where are you going to put the ones you've just counted? And they're jumping all over the place. So this obviously is a mystical spiritual teaching. What does it mean? It means that according to the cosmology and the taxonomy of the Greeks, there were 153 different kinds of fish in the world. That was their taxonomy, 153 different kinds of fish. So what is this saying? It's saying that the net with all of these 153 fish represents the kingdom of God, or the heart of the mother. It is big enough to contain all the fish, all of the tribes, all of the groups, all of the cultures are contained within the heart of the mother. And that's what Christ is trying to tell them. That's the symbol here. But why didn't Christ, have enough to feed them? Because he wanted now to pass the baton. He wanted them to eat fish that they themselves had caught. Up to now, he's been feeding them with his teachings. He wants them now to learn to feed themselves, and he wants them to feed other people. Now, this taxonomy, this Greek taxonomy that suggests that there's enough room in the net for all of the fishes of the world, for me represents the fact there is nobody excluded from the heart of God. Not Jews, not Gentiles, not slaves, nor free, nor Catholics, nor Protestants, not the divorced, or not those whom we have excommunicated for various reasons. Nobody is excluded from the banquet of God's largesse. That's what Jesus is saying right now. The net is big enough to contain all of us. But he wants to pass the baton. He's going to leave at this stage now and abandon even his physicality. And now they're on their own. Now they have to learn to feed themselves in their own teaching. They have to uncover their own inner soul and understand what it means to be a child of God. And then they have to go and feed other people. So there's a beautiful conclusion to the story where he takes Peter away from the group. The last time he'd seen Peter, Peter had denied 3 times that he even knew who Jesus was. He didn't even know who Jesus was, he said. Denied 3 times. And now 3 times Jesus asked him, he says, Peter, son of John, do you love me? And Peter says, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And Jesus says, Peter, son of John, do you love me? And Peter says, of course I love you. And Jesus says, thirdly, Peter, son of John, do you love me? Now, is this Jesus trying to get accolades? He's trying to represent the fact that Peter must know what Jesus represents. It's not, he's asking Peter, do you, a fisherman from Cana in Galilee, love me, a carpenter from Nazareth? He's not asking that question. He's saying, Peter, do you understand what I represent? Do you understand what I've been trying to teach you for 3 years? Do you really get it? Have you fallen in love with that? And if you have, then you'll be able to feed my lambs and my sheep. But do you understand that I'm not asking you, to bow down and worship a carpenter from Nazareth. I'm asking you to realize who I really represent. I represent a son of the Father, as you are a son of the Father, and as my mother is a daughter of the Father. If you get that, you realize that you yourself are incarnated divinity, and everybody you encounter is incarnated divinity, and everybody you attempt to feed and to teach is incarnated divinity. And your job is not to tell them stuff they don't know. It is to awaken them to stuff that they know at the core of their own being. That's what it means to be a follower of mine. So that's my 4th point, the last encounter of Jesus with his disciples. And finally, I'm going to call it the deeper mystical truth of resurrection. I want to go back to the very beginning, to the story of Jesus and the Magdalene. And for me, this story of Jesus and the Magdalene is not just a story of a beautiful love affair between a man and a woman. It's that at some level. But it is not just that. And it is not just the story of a lovely, great love affair between soulmates who found each other during incarnation. It is that, but it's a lot more than that. It's a love affair between the feminine and the masculine faces of God. It is a love affair between the transcendence and the immanence of Source. And it is also a love affair between the 2 facets of your soul, between Atman and Jiva, between that part of you that never leaves the side of God and that part of you that volunteers regularly for incarnation so as to generate experiences for God. It is a love affair between the 2 facets of your soul represented in Buddhism by the beautiful teaching of Turiya and Turiyatita. Turiya is the ability to inhabit the witnessing consciousness, the soul self that you are, the soul you who's watching your incarnational performance from heaven, but not identifying with that. And on the other hand, Turiyatita, where you can hold both positions simultaneously, where part of you is the witness who never leaves God's sight, and the other part is what volunteered for an incarnational experiences. The trick is you must totally, live out your incarnational experience with as much love as possible, but never identify with your incarnation. Incarnation is your role self. The other part of you is your soul self. And Turiyatita represents this beautifully in Buddhism, that there's a soul you and there's a role you. And you must never identify with the role you, even though you perform it to the best of your abilities. You must always realize there's a soul you, of which this is just a particular role that you're playing in a particular drama, in a particular incarnation. And finally, to say this, that all love stories, I believe, including the one that I wrote way back in Easter of 1980, all love stories are nostalgic, dimly remembered images of our true nature, of our true origin, and of our true purpose and our true homecoming. And that, my beloved companions on the journey, is the real meaning of resurrection.